My child, stop scrolling for just a moment, because what you are about to hear was not placed before you by accident. Something is waiting for you inside this message, something your heart has been trying to understand without having the words to explain it. Last night, while the world around you appeared quiet, a storm was unfolding inside the soul of the person connected to you. They reached a point where silence could no longer protect them, distractions could no longer numb them, and pretending everything was fine became impossible. Do not leave now. Stay until the end, because the confession they made inside that church began with your name, but it did not end where anyone expected. They had been carrying too much for too long. Every unanswered feeling, every conversation they replayed in their mind, every moment they almost reached out and stopped themselves had collected inside them like rain behind a weakening wall. To others, they may have appeared calm. They may have smiled, worked, spoken normally, and continued with their routine. But beneath that surface, their emotions were becoming heavier each day. They had convinced themselves they were strong enough to manage it alone. They believed time would reduce what they felt. They told themselves that distance would make your presence less powerful. Yet every attempt to forget you only made one truth more obvious: you had become part of the place inside them where no one else could reach. Pause here, because this is where the story begins to change. Last night did not start with a plan to enter a church. They did not wake up thinking they would confess anything. They did not prepare a speech, rehearse a prayer, or decide to reveal the truth that had been locked inside them. The evening simply became too heavy. A familiar memory of you returned without warning. It may have been your voice, the way you once looked at them, a message they still remember, or a moment when you showed them kindness while they were quietly struggling. That memory struck them differently. It did not feel like nostalgia. It felt like a question they could no longer avoid. Why did losing your closeness hurt more than they admitted? Why did your silence feel louder than everyone else's presence? Why did they keep comparing every connection to the peace they once felt around you? And why, after everything they had done to move forward, did their heart still return to you? They tried to shake it off. They walked from one room to another. They checked their phone and put it down again. They started writing something to you, erased it, and then stared at the empty screen. Their hands felt restless. Their thoughts moved too quickly. The mask they had worn for so long began to crack. Stay with me, because what happened next was not a dramatic display for attention. No one was watching. No one was there to comfort them. This was the moment their soul became tired of hiding from itself. They left the place where they were staying and stepped into the night. The streets were quieter than usual. The air felt different, almost as though the whole world had slowed down to make space for what was about to happen. They did not know exactly where they were going. Their feet moved before their mind made a decision. They passed familiar places without noticing them. Every step carried another memory of you. A conversation left unfinished. A truth left unsaid. A moment when they could have chosen courage but allowed fear to speak instead. Then they saw the church. Its doors were not wide open, but one side entrance remained unlocked. A faint light glowed from within. They stood outside longer than they expected. Part of them wanted to turn back. Another part knew that if they walked away again, they might continue carrying this burden until it destroyed every chance of peace. This is important, my child. Their breakdown did not happen because they were weak. It happened because the truth had become stronger than the walls they had built around it. When they entered, the silence inside the church felt almost alive. Their footsteps echoed softly. Rows of empty seats stretched toward the altar. Candles flickered near the front, and the light moved across the walls like a quiet invitation. They chose a seat near the back at first, wanting to remain hidden even though no one else was there. They lowered their head, but no words came. For several minutes, they simply sat in silence. Then their breathing changed. Their shoulders began to tremble. A tear fell before they could stop it. They wiped it away quickly, as though someone might see, but another followed. Then another. Within moments, the strength they had used to hold themselves together was gone. They covered their face with both hands and bent forward, trying to contain the sound of their own grief. But the church did not judge them. The silence did not reject them. For the first time in a long time, they allowed themselves to feel everything. Do not skip this part, because the reason they broke down was not only that they missed you. It was deeper. They were grieving the version of themselves that had been too afraid to love honestly. They were grieving the moments they had misunderstood you. They were grieving the words they had kept inside while acting as though they felt nothing. They were grieving the possibility that they may have waited too long. And beneath all of that was one terrifying question. What if you had finally learned to live without them? That question opened something inside them. They stood and walked toward the front of the church. Their steps were unsteady. By the time they reached the first row, tears were falling. Freely. They knelt near the altar, lowered their head, and finally spoke. At first, their voice was barely more than a whisper. They said, "I do not know why I came here." Then they stopped. They tried again. "I thought I could handle this. I thought I could move on. I thought I could ignore what I feel." Their words broke apart as they spoke them. They were not trying to sound beautiful. They were not trying to create a perfect prayer. They were speaking from the place inside them where pride had finally lost its power. Then your name left their lips. The moment they said it, they began crying harder. Something huge was waiting behind that name, something they had refused to admit even to themselves. They said, "I keep thinking about them. I keep trying not to. I keep telling myself that this is over, that it is too complicated, that I should leave it alone. But every time I ask for peace, their face comes back to me." They paused, and the church returned to silence. Then came the first confession. "I am the one who ran. Not you. Not circumstances. Not timing." They finally admitted that they had stepped away because what they felt frightened them. Your presence had awakened emotions they could not control. Around you, they had felt seen. Not the image they showed the world, but the real person underneath it. You noticed what others missed. You sensed when they were pretending. You brought softness into places where they had only known survival. And that scared them. They had spent years learning how not to need anyone. They had built an identity around independence, emotional control, and appearing unaffected. Then you came into their life and made them want something they could not manage through logic. You made them want honesty. You made them imagine a future. You made them question whether love could feel safe instead of painful. But when their heart began moving toward you, their fear moved faster. So they created distance. They became confusing. They sent mixed signals. They acted cold when they cared. They stayed silent when they wanted to speak. They may even have convinced you that your connection meant less to them than it truly did. Last night, kneeling inside that church, they confessed all of it. They said, I made them doubt what was real because I was afraid of how real it was. My child, stay until the end, because this was only the beginning of what they revealed. They continued speaking through tears. I thought if I pushed them away, I would feel powerful again. But I did not feel powerful. I felt empty. That sentence shook them. For the first time, they understood that the emptiness they had blamed on life, work, stress, or disappointment was connected to something they had refused to face. They had not only lost closeness with you. They had abandoned their own truth. They remembered the moments when you gave them chances to be honest. They remembered the questions you asked gently. They remembered how you waited without forcing them. They remembered the way your energy changed when you realized they were not ready to open up. That memory hurt them more than anything else. Because now they could see what they could not see then. You were not demanding perfection. You were asking for sincerity. You were not asking them to know every answer. You were asking them to stop hiding. You were not trying to control their heart. You were trying to understand whether it was truly present. And it was. It had always been present. They simply did not know how to carry it. The second confession came after a long silence. They lifted their head slightly and looked toward the light near the altar. Then they said, I am still in love with them. The word surprised even them. They had avoided using that word. They had replaced it with attachment, confusion, memory, chemistry, and unfinished emotion. They had used every explanation except the simplest one. But in that quiet church, with no one to impress and nowhere to hide, they finally called it what it was. Love. Not perfect love. Not easy love. Not love without fear. But love that had survived silence, distance, pride, and time. The moment they said it, something shifted in them. Their tears did not stop, but the struggle changed. They were no longer fighting the truth. They were grieving how long it had taken them to accept it. They whispered, I love them, and I do not know whether they still believe me. That was when their breakdown became more intense. Because they remembered every action that had contradicted their feelings. They remembered every time they disappeared. Every time they answered too late. Every time they used indifference as protection. Every time they let outside opinions influence them. Every time they allowed fear to create a version of them you could not trust. They saw the story from your side, and it broke something open inside them. They imagined how many nights you may have wondered whether you had imagined the connection. They imagined how many times you questioned your own intuition. They imagined the moment you may have decided to stop waiting for clarity that never came. And then they said something even more powerful. I made them feel unchosen because I was afraid to choose. Pause here and let that truth settle. They did not confess that you were too much.